terms of talking to consumers, there's a lot of noise out there, especially around this issue. Where do we need to go with that to more clearly communicate with them and try to break through some of that noise? I know that's a rhetorical question, but...
So, and you said it's on, maybe?
Get close.
Let me try that. When in doubt. There we go. So, in Pilgrims, we've tried to use trade associations, but trying to get the entire chicken industry to agree on how to even talk about antibiotics, we've been unsuccessful through National Chicken Council. And I think then when you have different companies taking a totally different stance regarding antibiotics, that just adds more confusion to our particular industry as far as that goes. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer. I just say, for us in chicken specifically, we've got to figure that out, because if we can't get a consistent message even within 15 integrators, how can we expect there to be consistent messaging across the industry? Then I'll speak for my parent company, JBS. Trying to get consistent messaging on our campus or the barnyard, as far as it goes, is a struggle as well. Because if Pilgrims make some sort of change regarding how we raise our broilers, and we want to make a claim regarding maybe critical antibiotics or something like that, trying to get the beef and pork brethren to make the same claim just adds more confusion, very similar to animal welfare claims.
And then I can comment for the National Pork Board how we try to reach the consumer in general. So we have done a number of registered dietitian tours throughout the year, where we actually take RDs out onto the farm, show them how pigs are raised from all aspects: health, welfare, public health, antimicrobial use. And then we have a day where we show them how to incorporate it into a healthy diet. I think chicken has it set. That's kind of why we followed with the other white meat. It was really trying to associate ourselves with being a healthy source of protein, and so re-educating those folks. So the kind of food service folks, the people that are preparing it, we have chefs that we work with directly as well. And then I mentioned doing that B2B conversation, so working directly with our customers, so if they have any questions, we can kind of clarify that. Incorporating technology as well, so we also have YouTube and some of the food apps that show you how to incorporate pork into your diet.
I just want to make a comment, I guess, in that I first got into the on-farm food safety thing in the 1990s, and the real push there was, consumers were being told to cook their food, and the pushback was the industry should be giving us safe food, and it's hard to see much push on consumer education for food safety in the way that there used to be in the past. And I don't know whether that's my impression or not, but it seems to have been the industry's taken that message. The consumers are telling us that we need to be responsible. But I think when you look at outbreaks and outbreak statistics, there's still a whole lot of events that are involved with improper storage, with improper handling, with improper cooking, and it's a very delicate path to walk down to remind the consumers that actually in the farm to fork continuum, they've got responsibilities too, and let's make sure we're not forgetting that little piece, but without being seen as a finger-pointing industry that's not doing their bit. But I think that's something that people should revisit a little.
Heather, there's a couple of questions on Slido for you specifically relative to pork production and being raised without antibiotics in terms of proportion. Where do you see that trend going? What percentage of pigs would be raised without antibiotics as we go forward?
That's a great question, and I noticed in Kendra's slide in the I almost said the swine industry, the poultry industry, again, going back to her first slide about vertical integration, there's very few systems in general, like 9 or something, like a handful. So they have a really good grasp on that proportion. I honestly don't know. Do you have in your head a percentage of RWA.
Only that it's very small.
Yeah, that's all I could tell you. And I've been doing some digging to get a better understanding. It's a potential, and again, our producers are considering it, and that's why we want to make sure that they go through the proper kind of self-assessment before they transition, and that's why we're putting together that option, or that handout, excuse me.
Yeah, my question for the poultry for Kendra. You mentioned it in your presentation that sometimes the marketing departments within their own companies are kind of creating a lot of the confusion with the consumers. In my view, the USDA has contributed greatly because their function, FSI's function, should be whether the product is wholesome and therefore suitable for human consumption, or not wholesome and then condemn. But now we got all these tiers of raised without antibiotics, raised without hormones, blah, 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 which is why your slide showed the consumers totally confused. So what is your feeling, or how can we get around this problem of having now so many labels out there and so much confusion among consumers?
Well, I think first we have to start at why the USDA Ag Marketing Service is so successful at all those certified claims. And I think it's because, and this is just my personal opinion, I'm not sure it's the opinion of Pilgrims, would be that our consumers don't trust big ag. And so they want somebody else to verify a claim. And so the USDA AMS fills that niche. Now, unfortunately, it still ends up on our package label, and it's still very confusing to the customer as to this logo means process verified, and then I can make up a cute little logo that looks very similar to it and put it on a package, and it looks similar. I think that's added also confusion. But when I look to how that has been addressed in the UK and the transparency that they have, where they have essentially skyboxes and open farms where you can actually take school children, schedule a school trip, go on farm, get up to the glass windows and look at how chickens are raised. Now, granted, it's a much smaller country. I think that's where we've got to go as an industry, at least with broilers, is some transparency. Now, our trade association has tried to do that. You can log on to National Chicken Council's website right now, and there's some webcams to one of the integrators on farms, and you can look at some chickens hanging out and see what they're up to. But that's the thing. Not too many people are doing that. So we've got to figure out as an industry, and maybe this is more a question for Heather, as to how to find those influencers. Because I'm amazed how one person on Facebook or on Twitter can make an announcement regarding food safety or how chickens are grown, and I can't put it back in the box if it's the wrong answer. And they'll get the wrong message out much faster than my whole marketing team could. So National Chicken Council has tried to have some of those media days, try to find those influencers, those bloggers, those folks with all the Instagram followers or anything else, and invite them. Scary as it sounds, but invite them out to our farms to see how chickens are raised. That's one thing we're attempting. Again, it's going to be hard to measure that success. So maybe, Heather, you want to follow up on that?
No, I would definitely reiterate that it's important to reach out to those influencers, and we have been doing that work. We have a specific food blogger tour where we find a way. So one of the things with swine, and especially our sow farms, is biosecurity, getting things in. We don't usually allow even cell phones and things like that in. You would have to disinfect them in, so they find ways to get cameras and phones in so that they can continue to do their thing and take those photos and post those photos of the sow farms and of the pigs that they're seeing. So we really try to meet them halfway, but also making sure we're protecting animal health and biosecurity.
We have a question over here.
So hi, I've been told I should introduce myself. I'm Sarah Sorsher. I work for Center for Science in the Public Interest. We represent consumers and work on food safety issues. I have another question for Kendra. I realize you're getting slammed, but it's always exciting to talk to someone with boots on the ground. So, and I will say that I do hear a lot from producers that they want people to come out and see what they're doing, but I've asked a lot of producers if I come out and visit, and I get ghosted a lot. And I don't know if it's because people think I'm going to do some kind of hidden footage thing on their farm, but it's actually kind of hard to close the loop on those requests. But my question is, twofold. One, I'm wondering, you say that animals should get treated when they get sick, but that it's always about economic incentives, right? And I've talked to pork producers who, in their contracts, they pay the producer regardless of whether they have to take a certain number of animals off the label. And I'm wondering if that's the way it works in your company, and if you've ever considered that model and whether it would work. And then two, just looking at that original slide you showed us of the way the industry works, we've seen from these recent outbreaks in chicken and turkey that there are these industry-wide sort of disease risks of ABR or salmonella. And I'm wondering if we're focused on the wrong stage of production, because the RWA and the attention to the labeling looks at that final stage of the bird that people are actually going to eat. But if the disease risk is happening further up the line, should we be paying more attention to the grandparent populations or the sort of upstream before the labeling would even take effect?
Wow, you have a lot of questions. You're trying to pack a lot, just like me. I try to pack a lot into a 10-minute presentation. So I'll try to answer all three very concisely. The first one, as to an invitation, would love to share my contact information with you and work with you. Obviously, we have to work with our contract growers, and there would be a little bit of hesitation there. But as I openly admitted earlier, that's something we've got to solve as an industry, and Pilgrims has to solve, is that transparency. We can't say we want transparency and then not let people on farm. The second issue was more around, well, help me with the second. The third, I'll skip to the third because that one's more pressing in my mind, which is about industry-wide, whether that's Salmonella redding in turkey, Salmonella infantis in chicken. How can it be so widespread, and should we focus more on primary breeders? There's a lot that goes in on those primary breeder companies, and there's two primarily in our industry before they deliver that day-old baby chick to us. A lot of that is Salmonella surveillance. So I don't believe that's going to ultimately be, but that's my personal opinion. The epi data may ultimately tell a different story, but I don't believe that's going to be the ultimate source of how that same Salmonella strain can be all over the world. The CDC's primarily the data that's been published in the recent press releases, and their CDC folks here, has focused on U.S. data, but we've seen that same 787 and 1080 elsewhere in the world. I think that's kind of fascinating. I think we should look at the byproducts potentially of our industry as well. So you take, for instance, poultry byproduct meal. It's sold around the globe as a source of fish protein for aquaculture. So it's possible that, again, we could be contributing. That's why we've got to look at AMR across the board, as to what's poultry litter, how is it land applied, could that be a source or anything else? So yeah, it's a nice chart, and it is my vertically integrated chart, but I don't think it's quite the solution to how we could have the same serotype everywhere. As for how the drug resistance, the AMR, is becoming more of an issue, I think that's a whole nother workshop, and it's been on Pilgrim's radar, it's on the industry radar as far as that goes. That's why this whole workshop exists, is trying to understand AMR, and I think that's the big communication piece back to our customers. When they're paying the money for chickens raised antibiotic free, I believe their perception is that that chicken is going to be either free of salmonella, or if it has salmonella on it, that salmonella is not going to have any antibiotic resistance. And in fact, that's not the case. And just because we're not using antibiotics does not mean that we're not applying some sort of pressure to that organism, like a metal pressure. We were talking about zinc. Copper is another that definitely applies some pressure to Campylobacter for us. Or that my processing plants have applied some selective pressure onto the organism by using a whole lot of acids as our antimicrobial in the industry, and then the acid resistant selection that we may be doing may also be causing some, or selecting for some AMR. So that was your first question, and the third, I apologize, I missed the second one. The economics of it and our grower model. I would probably not be the right person to necessarily answer that. However, I will say this regarding our grower model. If we are placing birds that are intended to be raised the entire life cycle antibiotic free to the grower, the density is going to be less. So the birds are going to have more square footage as far as that going into it. Now, yes, the grower is still going to be paid for live pounds coming back out of that farm. If that flock ultimately has to be treated, as far as that goes. Ultimately, back to the slides that I gave about that should be the right decision for the bird. Those birds should be thrifty. Their livability should be much greater. That producer's live pounds delivered to the processing plant should actually be much better as far as that goes. So I think the model works quite well in the poultry industry. But again, I'm not necessarily the subject matter expert on that. Did that answer your 3 questions? Okay. Sure.